Hello and welcome to the podcast today. I am Megan Hillier. I am the host, professional genealogist, and I'm excited to talk to you about my family and what I want to share with you today. So first of all, I was considering my own origin story. How did I get here? Where did all these traits come from? I'm going to talk to you about that today. So every 3 years about when I was a kid, we would have a family reunion with my grandfather's siblings. And I didn't really even understand who was all included in this big family gathering. I just knew that it was a family reunion. It was on my grandfather's side, and there was a lot of people that I didn't know. I've come to see that as I've grown up that a lot of families don't do that. There are a lot of people that do, but there's a lot of families that just don't do these big family reunions. And that was the case for my father's family. On my father's family, I only had 3 cousins, and we would get together sometimes, every year, at least once, but we didn't have these big family reunions, and that's because there just wasn't as many people to do that with. But with my mom's family, we had these huge family reunions every 3 years. There was generations of cousins running around, feeling connected. I had a few crushes on some of they're probably second cousins. I'm not sure. If you have family reunions like this, you probably relate. At least I hope so. Kissing cousins, that's a thing, right? Anyways, the point is, I felt like I was part of something bigger. I knew that I was not just me, right? That I had parents, I had grandparents, I had aunts and uncles, I had cousins, I had great aunts and uncles, and it was a safety. I felt safe. I knew that I had other people around me that knew me, that loved me, that cared about me. And I didn't really realize it then, but that feeling of belonging to something bigger was maybe my first understanding of an origin story. At these family reunions, we would, my uncle and his cousins, they would talk about stories. They would talk about stories of my grandfather, of his siblings, and I started to feel that I had a story of belonging. Like I knew who I was a part of, and I felt proud of that. And as I've thought about that and of my own upbringing and who I come from and all of these stories, I realize that we arrive in our life kind of mid-story, that we inherit more than our eye color or last names, that we inherit strengths, instincts, patterns, endurance, and values. So I might think, why do I have the abilities that I have? Where did they come from? I think that can be argued in a lot of different things. A lot of our abilities and talents, maybe that comes from our upbringing with our immediate family. But I think there are some tendencies and traits that have been inherited through generations. And as I think about that, I think about my own traits that I can see most clearly through my own siblings and myself, through my mother, and through my grandfather. And I'm sure that it goes even farther back than that. And that trait that I see that's been passed down, at least from my grandfather, is that we figure things out. We don't just think about things. We don't just dream about them. We build them. We make them happen. My grandfather, we'll start with him. He worked at a sugar factory for years. I think he did a lot of the maintenance, and he was the carpenter, I believe, at the sugar factory. So he did a lot of the building and figuring things out there, which I'm sure used a lot of that talents. But he also wanted to do things outside of that. And maybe he did some things that were a little unconventional. So he wrote poetry, he wrote stories, he wrote plays, and he also built a lot of things. He was a carpenter, like I said. So he built all of his granddaughters a cedar chest. He passed away before I turned 12 when I would have gotten a cedar chest built by him. But my family, I think it was my dad, made sure that I got one. He had some already started, so my dad finished it, and I got that when I turned 12. My grandfather also learned how to build things out of rock. He built this rock wall. If you live in Tabor, Alberta, there's their house that they lived at. He built a rock wall that we would sit on and we would wave at cars going by. It was a rock wall with a big arch that we would stand in for family pictures and get those done. He built a lot of really cool things with rock. And I think he had dreams, he had ideas, and he figured them out and just made them happen. And my mom also carried this trait. If you know her, she started a lot of different things in our community. She started a high school show choir. She started the Playhouse Society. She had ideas and made them happen. And I can see that with myself and with my siblings as well. So sometimes we think that our strengths are just our personality or our upbringing, but what if they're in our lineage? What if they've been passed down? And what if we can find some of those clues as we learn about our ancestors' lives? So looking back a little farther in my grandfather's upbringing in his life, I can see my great-grandmother's life. When I taught a course a couple years ago called Know Your Ancestor, I did a live course, and as I taught it, I was doing the work with my great-grandmother. I was researching her family and her life. And so when I did that, I found out that she was a member of the first girls or women's basketball team in McGrath, Alberta. So I learned that she played basketball. I think there's a certain trait that comes from someone that wants to start doing this, right? That they decide, okay, I'm actually going to play on this women's basketball team. I mean, they wore like a dress and they had to play basketball. And I'm pretty sure they played like on dirt. I don't think they had basketball gyms. Maybe they did. I don't know. But she played on the basketball team. She made really good friends and she did that. She also came up from Utah in the early 1900s. I think it was like maybe right 1900, 1901, 1902, around there. So her father decided to come up after her mother had passed away. He had made a promise that they would come up to Canada, and he made that happen. They came here, they settled, they created, they built, and they built a future here. And also think about my great-grandfather, so my grandpa's dad. He also seems like he was a bit of a dreamer as well. He was a piano salesman and he sang opera on the radio. So there was some things that, he didn't just live a normal, become a farmer, do that in his life, but he did some other things that maybe were a little bit out of the mold, probably because he wanted to. And so he figured out a way to make those things happen. So with your own lineage, you can do that as well. You can look at, okay, what traits or what patterns do I see in my family tree? And where might those have come from? Do I see that in my great-grandparents? Do I see that even further back? Do I see what traits would they have needed to have done that thing? I think about the same family line. If I think about, it's my great-great-grandfather, Ole Ellingson. He came from Norway in the mid-1800s to Utah. He joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was the only one in his family who did so. He made the trek over to the United States on his own. Like, what sort of trait would he have to do that, right? Maybe some of these same traits that I'm talking about. Having a dream, making it happen, figuring it out, even though it's scary. I also want to talk about some of my traits that maybe aren't as proud as like being a builder, figuring things out and doing that. As a kid and as a teenager, I was pretty shy. I felt awkward, like I didn't really fit in, and I preferred more close connections. A lot of times when I would talk to people or even my peers, I felt like it was fake. I remember when I first moved out on my own, I had to go visit some people in my neighborhood, and I went and visited them, and it just felt so fake. I felt like I was like smiling and acting like I cared about their life when I didn't really, and it just felt fake. And I wonder, like, where does that sensitivity come from? Where I crave genuine, real friendships, but have a hard time starting them. And I thought about my grandma. So she came to Canada when she was 4 years old. I've talked about her on the podcast before. She came from Wales, and she was made fun of as a kid because of her accent and how she spoke. And so she didn't want to speak Welsh anymore. So I wonder, sometimes I feel like maybe that's splitting hairs or trying to make some sort of meaning out of something that's not really there. But I do wonder if there are some traits that have been passed down like that. Some cautiousness, some wanting to kind of test the waters before you jump in and are vulnerable with someone. Maybe some of those sensitivities come from somewhere. like that from a grandmother who maybe had a hard time making friends and really was cautious in those relationships. I think she did do fine making friends later in life. We have a lot of pictures of her with friends, but maybe she just had a few close ones. Maybe she was a little more reserved in that. And maybe some of those tendencies can be inherited. When I was researching someone's origin story a couple months ago, I found that she had a lot of a pattern of divorce in her lineage. In her first 4 generations, one whole side, each couple had divorced. The other side, both of her grandparents had divorced. And I started thinking, do I have divorce in my family tree? Because I hadn't seen it anywhere. So I looked just to verify, but sure enough, none of my ancestors' direct line that I know of their relationships have not ended in divorce. So we could see that as a strength, maybe of commitment, covenant, stability, staying power, and building something long term. But maybe some stayed when they shouldn't have. Maybe endurance became silence. And maybe that loyalty wasn't always healthy. So then I can explore those patterns. So patterns aren't automatically good or bad. They're just information. Does that lineage make me slower to give up? More committed, more enduring, sometimes too enduring. I don't know, but I don't have to judge my lineage, but I get to become conscious of it. So I hope that these are giving you some ideas as you are listening about your own family tree, about looking at the patterns, the ideas, the occupations, the stories, the relationships in your lineage, and what do they mean? And how have they been passed down? Or how could they have been passed down? What traits would they have had to have? And are those still happening today? And when we do this, it helps us understand our own origin story. What makes us us? I've been watching this lineage continue in my own children. I think about my daughter. She prefers to do things on her own. She's very independent and prefers to stay home than to go out and hang out with friends. Maybe that's some of the tendencies that have been passed down from my grandma, from me, or my other grandma was quite reserved as well. I also think about my son, who is very much has the mentality of, I will figure it out. When he has an idea, he figures it out. He makes it happen. So I feel like that energy is still being passed down. Maybe it's a common trait, right? Maybe lots of people have this energy. Obviously they do. Otherwise we wouldn't have a lot of the things that we have in our world, right? People have to figure it out and take risks and make it happen. But I do see that pattern in my family. So when I watch my kids, I don't just see them, maybe see generations taking new shape, continuing the patterns, whether good or bad. So some people feel rooted. Some people might feel disconnected. Some inherit stability. Some inherit rupture. Some inherit silence. But everyone inherits something. And your origin story doesn't just explain where you came from, it helps you understand what is inside of you. You didn't begin at 0. You began in the middle. You are a continuation of all those generations that have come before you. So you can start to wonder, what strengths do I carry that didn't start with me? What patterns have shaped me? What am I proud to continue? And what am I consciously reshaping? I hope that this episode has given you some ideas for how you can explore your own origin story. This is why I care so much about origin stories, not because of charts, not because of dates, but because when you understand where you come from, something settles inside of you. You feel rooted, you feel belonging, and you can begin to understand who you are. I do offer the service. I do help people discover their origin story through looking at their first 4, 5, or 6 generations in their family tree. But first, we start with an origin initiation. This is where I sit down with you and find out your goals, find out what you are wanting to discover in your lineage. Maybe you just want to research one person in your family tree to really understand who they were. I can help to get that started and then to see where we can go for more. Or maybe you do want to discover your own lineage, your whole family tree, or as back far as we can go. We first start with an origin initiation where I get some information from you and we see what's possible. Maybe we see what countries your ancestors even come from, what the record availability is like, and what is possible for exploring your lineage further. So right now, the origin initiation is $297, but the price is going to be going up in March. So if you want to get a spot to do an origin initiation to get started, really looking deeper into your lineage, whether you have a full family tree already, but really want to understand who your ancestors were and how their lives are affecting you, or whether you don't have a family tree at all and you just know the names of your grandparents, but you want to go further. Either way, we can get started with an origin initiation. You can go to knowyourancestors.co/origin to get started with that. Again, the price is going to be going up in March sometime. So if you want to get in on that, book it now so that we can get started and you can start feeling more belonging, more understanding, and start discovering your own origin story. Thanks so much for being here today, and we will see you next week.